though these doubtless possessed a greater influence than she suspected. It was that indescribable something which women are quick to see and feel in men who have been blessed with wise and good mothers. This had an especial charm to Polly, for she soon found that this side of his character was not shown to everyone. With most girls he was very like the other young men of his set, except perhaps in a certain grace of manner, which was as natural to him as his respect for all womankind. But with Fanny and Polly he showed the domestic traits and virtues which are more engaging to womanly women than any amount of cool intellect or worldly wisdom. Polly had seen a good deal of him during her visits at the Shaws, where he was intimate owing to the friendship between Madam and his mother, but she had never thought of him as a possible lover for either Fanny or herself, because he was 6 or 8 years older than they, and still sometimes assumed the part of a venerable mentor, as in the early days. Lately this had changed, especially towards Polly, and it flattered her more than she would confess even to herself. She knew he admired her one talent, respected her independence, and enjoyed her society, but when something warmer and more flattering than admiration, respect, or pleasure crept into his manner, she could not help seeing that one of the good gifts of this life was daily coming more and more within her reach, and began to ask herself if she could honestly receive the gift and reward the giver. At first she tried to think she could, but unfortunately hearts are so contrary that they won't be obedient to reason, will, or even gratitude. Polly felt a very cordial friendship for Mr. Sidney, but not one particle of the love which is the only coin in which love can be truly paid. Then she took a fancy into her head that she ought to accept this piece of good fortune for the sake of the family and forget herself. But this false idea of self-sacrifice did not satisfy, for she was not a fashionable girl trained to believe that her first duty was to make a good match and never mind the consequences, though they rendered her miserable for life. Polly's creed was very simple. If I don't love him, I ought not to marry him, especially when I do love somebody else, though everything is against me. If she had read as many French novels as some young ladies, she might have considered it interesting to marry under the circumstances, and suffer a secret anguish to make her a romantic victim. But Polly's education had been neglected, and after a good deal of natural indecision, she did what most women do in such cases, thought she would wait and see. The discovery of Fanny's secret seemed to show her something to do, for if the wait-and-see decision was making her friend unhappy, it must be changed as soon as possible. This finished Polly's indecision, and after that night she never allowed herself to dwell on the pleasant temptation which came in a guise particularly attractive to a young girl with a spice of the old Eve in her composition. So day after day she trudged through the dull back streets, longing for the sunny park, the face that always brightened when it saw her coming, and most of all the chance of meeting, well, it wasn't Trix. When Saturday came, Polly started as usual for a visit to Becky and Bess, but couldn't resist stopping at the Shaws to leave a little parcel for Fan, though it wasn't calling time. As she stepped in, meaning to run up for a word if Fanny should chance to be alone, 2 hats on the hall table arrested her. "Who is here, Katy?" "Only Mr. Sidney and Master Tom. Won't you stop a bit, Miss Polly?" "Not this morning. I'm rather in a hurry." And away went Polly, as if a dozen eager pupils were clamoring for her presence. But as the door shut behind her, she felt so left out in the cold that her eyes filled, and when Nep, Tom's great Newfoundland, came blundering after her, she stopped and hugged his shaggy head, saying softly, as she looked into the brown benevolent eyes, full of almost human sympathy, "Now go back, old dear, you mustn't follow me." "Oh, Nep, it's so hard to put love away when you want it very much and it isn't right to take it." A foolish little speech to make to a dog, but, you see, Polly was only a tender-hearted girl trying to do her duty. "Since he is safe with Fanny, I may venture to walk where I like. It's such a lovely day, all the babies will be out, and it always does me good to see them," thought Polly, turning into the wide, sunny street, where West Enddom promenaded at that hour. The babies were out in full force, looking as gay and delicate and sweet as the snowdrops, hyacinths, and daffodils on the banks whence the snow had melted. But somehow the babies didn't do Polly the good she expected, though they smiled at her from their carriages and kissed their chubby hands as she passed them, for Polly had the sort of face that babies love. One tiny creature in blue plush was casting despairing glances after a very small lord of creation who was walking away with a toddling belle in white, while a second young gentleman in gorgeous purple gaiters was endeavoring to console the deserted damsel. "Take hold of Master Charlie's hand, Miss Mamie, and walk pretty like Willie and Flossie," said the maid. "No, no, I want to do with Willie, and he won't let me. Go away, Charlie, I don't like you," cried little Bluebonnet, casting down her ermine muff and sobbing in a microscopic handkerchief, the thread-lace edging on which couldn't mitigate her woe, as it might have done that of an older sufferer. "Willie likes Flossie best, so stop crying and come right along, you naughty child." As poor little Dido was jerked away by the unsympathetic maid and Purple Gaiters essayed in vain to plead his cause, Polly said to herself, with a smile and a sigh, "How early the old story begins." It seemed as if the spring weather had brought out all manner of tender things beside fresh grass and the first dandelions, for as she went down the street Polly kept seeing different phases of the sweet old story which she was trying to forget. At a street corner a black-eyed schoolboy was parting from a rosy-faced schoolgirl whose music roll he was reluctantly surrendering. "Don't you forget now," said the boy, looking bashfully into the bright eyes that danced with pleasure, as the girl blushed and smiled and answered reproachfully, "Why, of course I shan't." "That little romance runs smoothly so far. I hope it may to the end," said Polly heartily, as she watched the lad tramp away, whistling as blithely as if his pleasurable emotions must find a vent or endanger the buttons on the round jacket, while the girl pranced on her own doorstep, as if practicing for the joyful dance which she had promised not to forget. A little farther on Polly passed a newly engaged couple, whom she knew, walking arm in arm for the first time, both wearing that proud yet conscious look which is so delightful to behold upon the countenances of those temporarily glorified beings. "How happy they seem! Oh, dear!" said Polly, and trudged on, wondering if her turn would ever come, and fearing that it was impossible. A glimpse of a motherly-looking lady entering a door, received by a flock of pretty children who cast themselves upon mamma and her parcels with cries of rapture, did Polly good, and when, a minute after, she passed a gray old couple walking placidly together in the sunshine, she felt better still, and was glad to see such a happy ending to the romance she had read all down the street. As if the mischievous little god wished to take Polly at a disadvantage, or perhaps to give her another chance, just at that instant Mr. Sidney appeared at her side. How he got there was never very clear to Polly, but there he was, flushed and a little out of breath, but looking so glad to see her that she hadn't the heart to be stiff and cool, as she had fully intended to be when they met. "Very warm, isn't it?" he said, when he had shaken hands and fallen into step just in the old way. "You seem to find it so?" And Polly laughed with a sudden sparkle in her eyes. She really couldn't help it, it was so pleasant to see him again, just when she was feeling so lonely. "Have you given up teaching the Roths?" asked Sidney, changing the subject. "No." "Do you go as usual?" "Yes." "Well, it's a mystery to me how you get there." "As much as it is to me how you got here so suddenly." "I saw you from the Shaws' window and took the liberty of running after you by the back street," he said, laughing. "That is the way I get to the Roths," answered Polly. She did not mean to tell, but his frankness was so agreeable she forgot herself. "It's not nearly so pleasant or so short for you as the park." "I know it, but people sometimes get tired of old ways and like to try new ones." Polly didn't say that quite naturally, and Sidney gave her a quick look, as he asked, "Do you get tired of old friends, too, Miss Polly?" "Not often, but—" And there she stuck, for the fear of being ungrateful or unkind made her almost hope that he wouldn't take the hint which she had been carefully preparing for him. There was a dreadful little pause, which Polly broke by saying abruptly, "How is Fan?" dashing as ever.